In the movie The Incredibles, which much to my children's delight now has a sequel, or as they call it, Incredibles 2, there are two superheroes who marry each other and have 3 children. From the union of Elastigirl and Mr. Incredible come Violet, Dash, and baby Jack Jack. Part of the first film is focused in the discovery, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, so I do apologize. If you were going to watch it this evening, you may want to skip to the second movie. But part of that first movie is all about how these parents, Elastigirl and Mr. Incredible, discover that their children also have superpowers. Their son is incredibly fast and seems almost matched to his personality and age, not to mention his name, Dash. He can zoom around the room like most 6-year-olds seem capable of, but he can do it while also bending time. Baby Jack Jack has all sorts of powers that really don't get fully revealed until the sequel, and I won't go into that. But then there is Violet, the daughter who is on the cusp of her teenage years, and she has the superpower that I think many a teenage girl might want: invisibility. At the drop of a hat, she can make herself invisible. Eventually, she learns she also has the power to put up a kind of defense shield around herself and others. I would have loved this at times when I was a teenager. Now, okay, so the film is undoubtedly made for a younger age, but I think like most superhero films, it has a plot that brings you deeper. Consider how X-Men, right, is really about civil rights, or how Wonder Woman was perhaps about subversive feminism, or maybe Black Panther could have been about Black identity in the United States and liberation? Maybe, who knows? That one. V is for Vendetta, right? Is all about fighting, anybody know? Fascism. Do we have other comic book fans out here, or am I alone? Okay, thank you. I just got a little, like suddenly I wished I had the power of invisibility. So when you start to study comic books and their heroes, you learn that there is a pattern, a common pattern, that they're often about more than just what they appear to be on the surface. Now, I'm not sure about Violet and her invisibility, but I am sure there are times that I would have liked to avoided attention in my teenage years. But there have also been times in my life when it feels as if I could wear blinking lights and go unnoticed. I still recall the time just after settling into my very first settlement in a congregation. So I had only been in the congregation probably 2 weeks, and there was this huge multi-faith celebration for World Peace Day. And so all of the faith communities in Charlotte, which is like a city of about 2 million people, had gathered for this celebration and day of consciousness and awareness. And I had 2 longtime members who were in their 80s who invited me to join them because it was, you know, kind of an introduction to the community, if you will. And of course, all of the faith leaders came into this big procession, and it was in this massive cathedral. And afterward, there was a reception in the parish hall that was adjacent to the sanctuary. So when we got to the very end, the senior minister of that church stood at the door between the sanctuary and the parish hall greeting everyone. And so these esteemed members of my congregation said, well, we'll have to introduce you to him. Everybody knows this guy, and he's just a big deal in town. So I said, okay, I'm ready. So we walked up, and I had one member on my right and one member on my left, and they looked at the senior minister and they said, we are so glad to be able to introduce to you our new minister. And before they could say one more word, he looked up past my head and scanned the room and kind of made a furrowed eyebrow look and said, well, where is he?
Kick him in the shins.
This, of course, wouldn't be the last time. I've learned over time since that day how to recognize this kind of invisibility, either because of my gender or my age or a lack of a collar. How sometimes the stereotypes for what someone in my identities should be like according to someone else's should means that I become invisible because I don't fit those stereotypes either. Sometimes it means I experience things like sexual harassment because I am only visible as a stereotype, as an object. And when I study my female elders and listen to their stories, I learn how far worse it was only a decade or two prior. And even just 40 years ago, how impossible some of the things I now can do would have been. There are a few merits to invisibility, none that I would necessarily write home about. It sometimes affords you a head start when you are underestimated. But like Ralph Ellison writes in his novel, In the Invisible Man, without light, I am not only invisible, but formless as well. And to be unaware of one's form is to live a death. I myself, after existing some 20 years, did not become alive until I discovered my invisibility. Ellison writes of the invisibility not as a superpower, but the experience of being a black man in the United States. The character he creates in the novel cannot be seen for the prejudicial categories that render him invisible, far beyond his control. He is inconsequential to the white characters in the story and becomes an object of their projections, whether hatred or envy. Never is he truly seen. Toward the end of the story, which he alludes to in the beginning of the story, where our quote is taken from, he decides, after living in the basement of a building for free with all of the lights on in the world because the electric company doesn't even register him, that he will come back into the world to be seen. What does this mean? The earnestness of the young man who thought he could simply be good enough to be seen now knows the truth, or what he calls the light. And ironically, with that truth, bitter of a pill as it is, he can be seen. Perhaps you can relate. Maybe you've been made invisible in some way. Not as a superpower, but rather as a way that a part of you somehow became a tool for someone to disregard the rest, to fashion you into a caricature. Could be a way you are differently abled, including those invisible disabilities. Perhaps it's something cultural. My wife and I talk about how she's sometimes treated as a Southerner in Yankee land. Maybe it's something small that you have learned over time to keep hidden, or something you can't hide at all. Something that people know as soon as they see you. And then they have a story of you, or a way of looking at you or treating you that you can't quite get out of, no matter how good you are. Ellison says that the only way out is the light, or what he calls the truth. Ella Baker, my Shiro and civil rights activist and our daughter's namesake, agrees. Give them light, she says, and people will find the way. The light she speaks about is the same as Ellison. It's a metaphor for truth. I think sometimes our own liberation, our light, can only come at the cost of someone else's discomfort. I am right here, I said to that minister. Oh, I'm sorry, he said, I just didn't see you. There was this pause after he said, "I just didn't see you," that I got to make a very quick decision in. In that pause, I had to decide in a new city with a new person that I'd likely see again, who had a fair measure of power in front of brand new congregants who didn't want to be embarrassed. What would I say? "Oh, it's okay," I said. Ugh. That phrase and all of its associates. "No problem, no worries, I understand, don't sweat it." The cost of those little phrases over and over again. Over the years, I have experienced a small share, not nearly as much as my mother or grandmother, of misogyny. So often when I tell that story, I wonder about the first feeling I had when it happened to me, when I was made invisible. Was it anger? I think that's what everyone projects, right? The angry woman, or the angry fill in the blank. The angry who can be dismissed. But I think now the first feeling I have when it happens is fatigue. And so maybe out of laziness, I'm trying to no longer manage the discomfort of others. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you." "Give them light," says Ella Baker. "Truth teaches," says Allison. "Come out from beneath the ground." You did see me. You looked at me, but you ignored me. It's surprising how much energy a response like that incites. One could say it's electric. Now, it can't always be done. But the thing about being invisible for any reason, it's not just the pain to the one made invisible, but it also means that a whole set of wonderful things have gone unseen and can't be shared. A superpower, even, perhaps. Ellison's character in The Invisible Man is a brilliant orator who can make powerful speeches that inspire and persuade, but for years this gift goes unseen, unrecognized, and not able to be shared. And so the world is a little dimmer. Tell people the truth and they will find their way. More than developing quick, honest quips to people, of lately I've realized that once you have some light, our faith instructs that we ought to share it, even at the cost of discomfort. Recently, there was an article in the UU World, which is our magazine that a whole bunch of you get from our denomination. It comes out seasonally. And there was an article that was called After LGB. And it was written from the perspective of someone who is not transgender, who is cisgender, writing all about her experience of trying to understand transgender identity. The article was published even though transgender Unitarian Universalist leaders were in conversation with the editor and the author and begged them not to publish it, that the article contained all sorts of statements that would cause harm. The article was published even though transgender authors and leaders proposed that they could write an article or two that could be published, or they could be quoted extensively. They claimed, and rightfully so, that the article, rather than helping people understand how to be inclusive, centered the experience once more of someone who's not transgender. Now, as soon as I saw this unfolding, I had a pause. I had a moment where I got to make a decision. I had to decide whether or not to share the call to write letters to the editor, And whether to write a letter myself, the editor, someone whom I know. Whether to write a note to a very well-intentioned Unitarian Universalist, knowing that my note would cause her discomfort. Knowing that my sharing of the article would cause discomfort. Knowing that my letter to the editor would cause discomfort. So what do we do? More and more, maybe just because I'm tired, I've stopped managing other people's discomfort and have started listening to the pain and trying to discern the difference between discomfort and pain. I wrote a letter, and many of you did as well. When we do so, when we move toward causing discomfort while healing pain, we invite the possibility that a new story emerges. We draw the circle wide. And in that emergence, sometimes a superpower arises. Let's return to Violet for a minute. Now, in the plot, she discovers she can be invisible, and I'm really sorry for ruining this movie for you. It's a great one. I've seen it 12 times. But she discovers something about her invisibility. So initially, she just uses it for herself, and she finds that that's not really such a superpower, right? How do you save someone by being invisible yourself? But what she discovers when she shares this superpower and reaches out to someone, she can form a shield, a bubble, a circle that is drawn around people that protects them. She can deflect harm. Her superpower arises from her ability to expand her circle. Now, I don't think we should all be invisible, but rather the point is that the superpower isn't the invisibility at all. Violet was confused. Her superpower is the ability to shield people through acts of solidarity, community, and often love, if you will, to shine a light. This isn't the act of maligning someone who does harm or making them evil. What I'm learning is we can both hold compassion and expose truth. We can cause discomfort, still affirm the humanity of the one who caused harm, and we can heal pain. Amen. That's the kind of space we created in the meditation today, right? It's a space large enough to hold it all. I think that's the definition of love. To hold one another in compassion while sharing our truths. To quote the Universalist L. Griswold Williams, love is the doctrine of this church. And if by some way we are able to call out what is hidden within one another, to bless each other in the midst of our wounds, and to shine light in this world, I believe then the people, we will find our way. It starts when we say we and know who we mean, and each day we mean one more. Draw the circle wide, beloved. Discover your superpowers. Draw it wider still.